Okay, we're going to look at order of operations with different grouping symbols, so if you can go ahead and title this next set of notes with that title. First, let's review order of operations. When we're talking about it, the first step in order of operations is to do grouping symbols. If we are going to have a short way to remember order of operations, we want to call it GEMDAS with G instead of P, and then the M and D next to each other, and the A and S next to each other. So grouping symbols are symbols that group more than one number together. So they group numbers and operations. And you have 5 different types. The first video talked about parentheses and brackets. You also have soft brackets. You have the square root symbol and the absolute value bars. Okay, so 5 different types of grouping symbols. Each of these symbols means that you have to do whatever is inside of them first before you complete the grouping symbol. So whatever's inside. So if I'm looking at square roots, I have to do whatever inside the square root first before I take the square root of that final number. Same thing with absolute value. I have to do whatever's inside the absolute value first before I take the absolute value of that final number. And the next step would be exponents. With exponents, we're going to use our calculator using the Y to the X button to complete exponents, and the parentheses if we have negatives. Okay. If you use your calculator, there's a difference between -2 to the third with -2 inside parentheses and -2 to the third with no parentheses. When you type both of those in, take a second to pause, grab a calculator and do that. You'll see that -2 to the third, oh, I'm sorry, we should actually do to the second. Let's try this one more time. -2 to the second versus -2 to the second. When you type the first one into your calculator, you'll get 4, but when you type the second one into your calculator, you'll get -4. So it's important how we write exponents, especially with negative numbers. The next step is multiplying and dividing. It's pretty self-explanatory. We just need to make sure that we look at them at the same time and go left to right. And then same thing with addition and subtraction. Self-explanatory, but we look at them at the same time and go left to right. We're going to look at a few examples. First example is taking a look at the difference between 2 sets of absolute value bars with an operation between and 1 set of absolute value bars with the operation inside. So the example says simplify the following expression. Go ahead and write down the example, the directions, and then the problem. So if I'm using order of operations, or like some of you like to call it GEMDAS, I look at grouping symbols and I see I have 2 sets of absolute value, but there's only 1 number inside of the grouping symbols, no operations. So I get to actually perform the absolute value since there's only 1 number there. So for the first one, I take the absolute value of 5. What you need to know is you are only doing 1 operation at a time. Okay. We're not doing more than 1 operation so that we can see each step by step, and it's easier for us to find our mistakes if we've made one. We bring everything else down. There's no arrow saying that this is coming down. It's just write your answer to the first operation, rewrite everything else. Then we'll do our next grouping symbol. So in this absolute value, I don't see an operation either. That means I have 1 number, and I'm then allowed to take the absolute value. I need to take the absolute value to finish the grouping symbol step before I move on to any of these steps. So the absolute value of -15 is 15. I bring down the addition and I bring down the 5. Now I'm done with my grouping symbols. I have no exponents. I have no multiplying and dividing. I'm going to now do the adding. And again, 5 plus 15 is going to get me 20. Right? You may use a calculator, but you can only use it to complete the steps. You can't use it to type everything in and then get your answer. We still want to see step by step. Okay, let's write down example 2. It says evaluate the following expression. Those are directions that are very similar to the top ones. They mean just literally do as much as you can until you find the value of the expression. So we're going to use order of operations here because I see grouping symbols and an operation. My grouping symbols are the absolute value, and I do see more than one number inside the absolute value and an operation. So I need to actually do that operation first. I would type 5 plus 15 and then hit the positive negative button in our calculator. And then I would see that I get negative 10. I need to bring down the absolute value bars because I haven't done the absolute value yet. I look at my list and I'm still on grouping symbols. Now I complete the absolute value of negative 10 and I get 10. Because I have no exponents, multiplying or dividing, adding or subtracting left over, I can circle this as my answer because I have one number left. Let's take a look at example 3. It says find the value of the following expression. So again, same sort of thing. We have multiple operations and grouping symbols, so we're going to use order of operations. I see grouping symbols and I see an operation inside those absolute values. So I cannot take the absolute values yet. I need to do 1 minus 4. Again, type that into your calculator. I don't care how easy it looks. When you type in 1 minus 4, we get negative 3. We bring down the absolute value bars and we do not draw arrows for everything else. We literally must bring down everything as it was written. I'm still not done with my grouping symbols because I need to finish by taking the absolute value so that these absolute value bars are gone and they become things like parentheses. So I'm going to take the absolute value of negative 3 and get 3. Because I had a number that was next to the grouping symbols, it still means multiplying, so I'm going to put parentheses around the 3 and bring down the 5 and the minus and the 2. I'm now done with grouping symbols because parentheses don't tell you to do anything and there's only one number inside of them. I have no exponents. I do see multiplying, so I'm going to do 5 times 3 in my calculator and get 15. I bring down the minus and I bring down the 2. I'm now done with the multiplying. I'm going to move on to the subtraction. I type 2 minus 15 into my calculator, and I get negative 13. Okay, example 4. Here we're going to look at doing order of operations with square roots. You could type in or write on your notes the example, so simplify the expression. For example 4, we're going to use order of operations. Okay, I do see grouping symbols, which are my square root symbol. Inside the square root symbol, I need to use order of operations as well. So inside the square root symbol, I look at it as its own separate problem and ignore everything else right now. And I see grouping symbols inside there as well. So I have to look inside those grouping symbols and use order of operations. I see an exponent inside them and a subtraction. I know exponents come before subtraction. So I'm going to type 4 squared into my calculator using the y to the x button. So we type in 7, y to the x, and then squared. I think I said 4 squared, I meant 7 squared, my apologies. So 7 squared in the calculator, and I get 49. I need that still in grouping symbols because I haven't done anything with the subtraction yet. I bring down the multiplying by 3. I put the square root over everything, and then I bring down the 12 and the subtraction out front. I'm still not done with the grouping symbols inside the square root, so I'm going to do 49 minus 22. When I do that, I'm going to get 27. Okay, so I get 27. I bring down the multiplying by 3 and the square root symbol. I don't need the parentheses around the 27 anymore because they already had the multiplication symbol behind it. I bring down the minus and the 12. Then we're going to do 27 times 3. So I'm going to get 81. I bring down the square root symbol. I bring down the subtraction sign, and then I bring down the 12. Once I do that, I am now done with what's inside of the grouping symbol. I only have 81 here now, but I do need to finish this step by taking the square root of 81. So I'd use my calculator and type in 81 and then hit the square root button. That will get me 9. I don't need the square root symbol anymore because I've already found the square root. This is my root. I bring down the subtraction and the 12. So I'm now done with my grouping symbols. I have no more exponents. I have no more multiplying and dividing. So I'm going to do the adding or subtracting. I type in 12 minus 9 into my calculator and I get 3. All right, last example is going to be using a special case with grouping symbols. So not only do we see parentheses and brackets, but we see this fraction bar. And the fraction bar also technically means grouping symbols as well. It means grouping because you've got to finish everything in the numerator and everything in the denominator, so you have one number over another number before you try to use this fraction bar as division. So it groups what's in the numerator and what's in the denominator. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the numerator first using order of operations. Make sure that you've written down the example and the directions. I see grouping symbols, and inside those grouping symbols, I see more grouping symbols. So I'm going to do what's inside the grouping symbols first. This exponent is not inside of them, so I don't do this exponent first. I'm going to do the 2 plus 4 first. So I'm going to get 2 plus 4 is 6 when I type it into my calculator. I don't need parentheses around the number because it's not negative. If this was a negative 6, I would need parentheses to stay around it. I bring down the minus and the 30. I bring down the brackets and the 12 in front of it, and then the fraction bar and 8 minus 2 squared. I still have grouping symbols, and inside of that I see exponents and subtraction, so I'm going to do the exponents. We're going to type in 6 squared, so that's 6, the y to the x button, and then 2. I'm going to get 36 when I do that. I bring down the subtraction and the 30, the brackets and the 12, the fraction bar and the 8 minus 2 squared. I still have my brackets remaining, so I'm going to go ahead and do the only operation inside of them, which is subtraction. I do 30 minus 36 in my calculator and I get negative 6. I can make the brackets into parentheses now just to show multiplication, not for grouping symbol purposes. Bring down the fraction bar and the 8 minus 2 squared. Okay, now that I'm done with the grouping symbols in the numerator, I move on to the other steps. I don't see any exponents, so I'm going to do my multiplication. Typing into my calculator 12 times negative 6. When I do that, I'm going to get negative 72, and that's still over 8 minus 2 squared. So I'm going to do, now that I have one number in the numerator, I can move on to the group that's in the denominator. So I see no grouping symbols here, but I do see exponents. So I'm going to type that exponent into my calculator. I'm going to have negative 72 in the numerator, and then 8 minus, and the answer to 2 squared is 4. And now I can move on from exponents. I have no more multiplying and dividing in the denominator, so I'm going to do adding and subtracting. I still have negative 72 in the numerator, but 8 minus 4 is 4 when I type that into my calculator. Okay, now that I have one number in the numerator and one number in the denominator, I can go ahead and check to see if I can use the fraction bar as division. So I would type in negative 72. So we would do 72 and then hit the positive negative sign. Then we hit the division symbol and 4. And we see that we can use it as division. We don't need to leave it as a fraction bar, and we end up getting negative 18. All right, so please use these examples and what I've talked about here to complete your practice for today.